You know, many individuals are faced with things in their life that could make or break them. And I want to introduce you to a young woman who took something in her life and turned it into something beautiful. Joining me now is young author Chloe Howard. Hi, Chloe. It's great to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
She's the author of Stand Beautiful. Now, you've not written just one book. You've written 2 books.
I have.
And I have to ask you, how old are you?
I am 18. Just graduated high school.
18 years old and already an author.
Yes.
Well, that has to feel good.
It does. Yeah.
So let's start off with talking about your story. Tell me a little bit about your story and how the books came about.
Yeah, so I, 18 years ago, was born with a severely deformed foot, a club foot. So when I was born, my foot was upside down and backwards like that. And I also only have 3 toenails total. And so growing up, I knew I was different from the very beginning. I had to have many surgeries to correct my foot. I would go on daddy-daughter dates to see my surgeon, and I would go and hang out in the cast room and get my pink cast put on, and I'd show up to school in a wheelchair. But I loved it. I felt like I had a secret superpower. I felt different in a way that my friends weren't, and I loved it. Up until at age 14, I was assaulted on my high school campus because of my foot deformity. Without my consent, I was restrained. My hands and arms were held to my sides, and I was picked up, and my shoe and sock were taken off my foot forcefully without my consent. And in that moment on that day, kind of watching my naked foot be held out in someone else's hands in front of me, and I saw everyone around me lean in, and I saw for the first time in my life my foot as something negative, as something that was ugly and something worthy of being ashamed of, and I became incredibly depressed following that.
Because up until that time, what are some things that you heard your entire life from your parents, who obviously were incredibly supportive?
They were very supportive growing up, and still are, of course. They told me that my foot was beautiful and special, and I grew up in a household that loves God, and so that faith was very important also in kind of finding purpose in my foot. And so growing up surrounded by the supportive family and this community, I felt loved and I felt supported and I felt good. I felt like there was a reason. And following the assaults, I didn't know what that reason was anymore. I was lost until that summer following my freshman year when this happened. I had the opportunity to meet Bono, the lead singer of the band U2, who I love. I worked up the courage to tell him my story about my foot and about my assault and how one of his songs really meant something to me. And he looked at me and he said, "Chloe, what happened to you is an injustice." And then he challenged me. He said, "Chloe, speak out, because every time you speak about injustice, about what happened to you, you speak in support of those who cannot speak for themselves." And that kind of fueled me and gave me the power and the courage that I needed to, a year later, give a TED Talk at age 16.
I think it's time to redefine normal. Some people say my feet don't look normal, but the way that my deformed foot looks is normal to me.
How did you come up with the idea for Stand Beautiful? I mean, and how did you come up with the idea that, I'm going to write a book. That's what I'm going to do. That's how I'm going to handle the challenge that I've been tasked with.
After my assault, I was really, really hurting. And every single morning, I would wake up and look down at my deformed foot, and I'd be like, no, like, why is this attached to the bottom of my left leg? Like, I hate this. But for whatever reason, I don't know when I started it or why, I would get home from school every day and go up to my room and take a Sharpie and write the word beautiful on the inside of my foot along one of the biggest scars on my foot. And it kind of became this thing that I did, and it was kind of like a mindless act, but slowly but surely, I began to associate the idea of beauty with my deformity. And I began to, over time, see my foot as beautiful. And so now, every time I look at my foot, all I see is beauty, and I actually recently got the word beautiful tattooed over my foot as my constant reminder that there is purpose associated with that.
And of course, that message we hear clearly in your book, Stand Beautiful, a story of brokenness, beauty, and embracing it all. So this book, tell me a little bit about this book first that you wrote and who it's geared towards.
Yeah, so this book is marketed as a young adult book, YA, but I believe that the message of self-acceptance and love and anti-bullying and hope is one that isn't just for girls, it's also for boys. It isn't one that's just for the teenage age group, it's also for adults, because everyone needs to know that they're perfect just the way they are, that they can choose to see themselves in their brokenness as beautiful. At root, the story, which is mine, that I talk about in this book, is about finding beauty through brokenness, how amidst all the brokenness that is our world now, there is still hope to be found, and we can look at all of our brokenness and see it as beautiful.
Well, you're certainly a beautiful person. You know, a lot of viewers watching right now, and maybe they're sitting there completely relating to your story, and they want to get their hands on your book. What would you say to an individual out there who may be sitting there thinking that they have been faced with some of the same things? Or maybe they're sitting there thinking, gosh, I wish I could be an author, but they're scared to do it. What would you say to that person out there watching?
Well, I would say that, you know, after my assault, I felt incredibly alone in what I was going through. So primarily, you are not alone. You never are alone. You never have been alone, and you never will be alone, because there are so many people going through what you're going through. And that's one of the other messages that I wanted to convey in this book, that sure, maybe you weren't born with a clubfoot and maybe you weren't bullied in the same way that I was, but we all have stories. Stories that we need to hear and stories that we need to tell. But I would also say that it's all about labels, and I don't know what labels you're dealing with right now or what labels you feel like have been thrown at you, but those labels don't have to stick. That only you have the power to determine what your labels are, and you are strong and you're resilient and you can stand beautiful. You can let your label be beautiful.
You can let your label be beautiful and stand beautiful, and you can pretty much accomplish anything you set your mind to. I mean, if you're like Chloe, who knows, you could be an author just like her. Where can we get this book? Because I know Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, you can get my book wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Also my website, standbeautiful.me. You can also learn more about my journey on Instagram or Facebook at @IStandBeautiful. And you can use hashtag #IStandBeautiful to share your own story, how you are standing beautiful in your own life.
Well, I'm going to continue to keep up with you because I think we're going to be hearing a lot about Chloe Howard as we go into the future. Chloe, I want to say thank you for joining us
Of course.
on the bridge today. It was great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.